Treason is not the reason for the season. FAQ number 4, criminals are already breaking the law, so they'll just break this gun control law too? Thank you for your question. MiSSA 20XX would implement universal background checks for all gun purchases and registration of guns to their owners. Legally, MiSSA can only require law-abiding civilians to do background checks and register their weapons because requiring a criminal to register a gun to themselves would violate the Constitution's protection against self-incrimination. So, MiSSA can't require criminals to register their weapons, nor does it need them to do so for MiSSA to work. The path guns take to get into the hands of criminals looks like this, starting from manufacturers, to dealers, to legal owners, and then they change hands of legal gun owners perhaps several times. And then at some point, a straw buyer buys the gun. And then they sell the gun to a criminal. A straw buyer is someone who has no criminal record, so they can pass a background check to buy a gun retail, and then they turn around and sell the gun to a criminal. Straw buying is illegal, but the lack of paper trail makes it nearly impossible to find straw buyers and even harder to convict them of gun trafficking. One effect of MiSSA 20XX is that it creates a paper trail of breadcrumbs of every gun from manufacturer, to law-abiding citizens, until it ends up in the hands of a straw buyer. When the seller sells the gun to the straw buyer, they would transfer registration of the gun to the straw buyer. When the straw buyer sells the gun to a criminal, they won't do any paperwork. If the criminal is ever caught with that gun, the registration will still point to the straw buyer. At which point, the police have a solid chain of evidence to prove the straw buyer had the gun, and a solid chain of evidence that the straw buyer sold the gun without doing the required paperwork. This evidence would make it much more likely to convict the straw buyer of gun trafficking. And once a straw buyer is convicted of gun trafficking, they can't pass a background check, meaning they can no longer buy guns at cheap retail prices and sell them to criminals at inflated black market prices. The effect of MiSSA is to find and locate every single straw buyer who is selling guns to criminals. Doing this does not require the straw buyers or criminals to do anything. And due to self-incrimination protections, the law couldn't require them to do the paperwork anyway. MiSSA works entirely by having all law-abiding people to do background checks when buying or selling a gun, and to update registration of the gun to the new owner. It doesn't have to be a complicated process. It doesn't have to be an expensive process. It just needs to track the legal owners of firearms. And when a criminal is captured with a firearm, the paper trail will point to the straw buyer who sold it to the criminal. And it will be a solid enough chain of evidence that the straw buyers can be located and convicted, which will stop them from supplying guns to criminals.